Hello everyone, welcome to GE2 Purposive Communication. So in this video, we will talk about the topic under chapter 5. But before that, let's have a sort of recap about what we had discussed on our previous two videos. So the first video, that was the chapter 4 first part, and we've learned about registers of spoken and written language. So that was the time that we've learned about formal, informal, and neutral. And we also learned about language register. So part of it is the second video, which is the second part of chapter 4. And we've learned about varieties of language. So in that video, we've learned about the history of English, where English came from, and why is it there are varieties of language. So we've learned about American English, British English, and Australian English. But in that video, we've only learned the two common Englishes, that we have American and the British one. So in this video, we will discuss another topic. It talks about the chapter 5, which is evaluating messages and images. So to better understand about evaluating messages and images, the following terms, or we will going to encounter different terms that we will going to use, or perhaps we will going to learn. So these terminologies will give you ideas about the important things that you really need to know as you get engaged yourself in this chapter. So again, the topic of this chapter talks about evaluating messages and images. So as being mentioned by the topic itself, evaluating. So for the information of everyone, evaluating is the highest part of the cognitive development of a person, because you are now on the independence of your cognitive aspect. So accompanied with evaluating is the creating. So evaluation and creation. So that's the time that you are now engaging into the independence of learning. So in this lesson, we will try to dig deeper into your cognitive development. How are you going to evaluate a certain message, considering the different messages that we have encountered? So part of this evaluating or evaluation is what we call critical thinking. So critical thinking or critical evaluation is one of the levels of comprehension advanced by Benjamin Bloom, as that's the one that I've said to you earlier. It requires a thorough analysis and critical look at information, messages, and images that we get from or use for reading materials, lectures, or presentation for one to obtain or use accurate information. So this time, what we are going to do is we will try to calibrate our learning towards independence using evaluation, using one of the levels of comprehension advanced by Benjamin Bloom, what that is the critical evaluation. So as being mentioned by many people, that in one image, we can create thousands of messages. So let's try to check some images later on as part of your activity about what these images trying to imply to you as a reader, to you as an audience. So being part of this evaluation of these images, we have the so-called media messages. And yes, because we are in our new generation, we are so-called the technological era. So since media messages are developed, so technology-wise, we are literate. So they could be somehow altered or disintegrated. That means that all the information stated in media or technology somehow are inaccurate, or we're not really sure if it's true or not, because there are possibilities that this information are being altered or being changed or being added. So lately, many fake news, yes, that's very true. Many fake news and altered media materials mislead people into accepting and believing them. So, thus, media messages and images should be evaluated to ensure their validity, reliability, and appropriateness. So that's our main objective, why we need to evaluate messages and images for us to be able to identify the validity of the information, the reliability of the information, and the appropriateness of the information. Therefore, content and visual analysis could be applied to messages and images using the different checklists that was being provided with different authors and different people. Um, Along with this video, we will learn about what are those things that we need to consider if we are evaluating messages or images, okay? So if we could recall our first topic about communication, we have the so-called communication process. So part of this communication process, we have four, if I am not mistaken: sender, message, receiver, and feedback. So why I mentioned those four? Because it have an important role in evaluating messages and images. So let's discuss it one by one. So first is the sender. So since, as being mentioned earlier, that there are rampant of fake news being posted online or in media messages. So we need to be careful and we need to evaluate to ensure the validity of the information, and we need to make sure that the source is reliable and this is appropriate. Okay, so how? So we need to consider the sender. First thing in mind, we need to ask if we read or hear something or some news. We need to consider and ask ourselves, who created the message? So we need to identify who is the sender of the message. Was it by a news organization, a public citizen, or an advertiser? So you need to identify those things. After identifying the sender or the creator of the information, you need to evaluate also the message. So in the message, you are going to ask yourself, what does the message say? So you need to identify the subject, the main point, and all the supporting details that are accompanied with it. And you need also to ask, is the information fair and logical? Because somehow there are information or there are news or there are articles that are one-sided, that somehow you are being persuaded. So therefore, as a reader, as an audience, we need to be familiar on the information that we are reading. If it's fair enough or it was being presented logically. And next, we need to identify also the point of view. What points of view are shared in the message? Is it personal point of in general, or you are pointing something? Which one are left out? Because we are not really sure if there are information that was being altered. And the next one, what images or sounds catch my attention, if there's any? Next is the medium. So after knowing the who is the sender of the message, after knowing the content or the message itself, you need also to know what is the medium of the information. What type of media is used to deliver the message? Is it on television, radio, or just word of mouth? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of the media format? If you're using the television, what is the strength and weakness of a television? For you to be able to identify the reliability and the validity of the information. And the next one is the receiver. You as a receiver. So you need to identify on the information who is the target of the message. Is it you? Is it the kids, children? Is it those young adults? You need to identify the appropriateness of the message. And you need also to ask yourself, how might people different from me interpreting this message? So you need also to consider what would be the understanding of other people interpreting this message that I am reading. So again, in terms of interpretation, we have different interpretation. So we need also to consider that. So those are the things that we need to remember. And the last one is context. So the last portion or the last point that we need to consider on evaluating an image or a message is the context. What is the purpose of this message? Is it for information only? Just for the advertisement? Persuasion? To educate me? You need to identify the purpose of the message. And you need also to consider who controls the transmission of the message. Because the transmission of the message should be identified, especially if it's word of mouth. You need to be careful on trusting on the message or the information. So that's the reason why the focal point of this topic, evaluating images and messages, is to ensure the validity, the reliability, and appropriateness of the information that you've read or you've heard. So those are the things that we need to remember. So we need to consider the sender. We need to also to consider the message. We need also to consider the channel or the medium. And we need also to consider the receiver. And the next one is we need also to consider the context. So those are the things that we need to remember if we are reading something or we hear some information from other people or in television or in radio. So that is for evaluating images. So now, at this point, you may have already mastered the methods. Those are the methods that we've discussed. So I assume perhaps that you already mastered the those methods in evaluating messages and images. However, at times, you may fall into the trap of being convinced of the accuracy and validity of the message and image due to the use of appeals, which are illogical or improper. So we need to remember that. As I've said to you earlier, there are also instances that we believe in a certain information without considering other aspects. Okay? Again, the main point of this video is for you to be able to ensure if you hear some information, you need to consider the validity of the information, the reliability of the information, and the appropriateness. However, we also include the accuracy of it. Okay? We need to consider if the message is accurate or not. Because there are instances that we were able to we were convinced by a certain information which is not true. And it happened because of the illogical or improper statement of information and because of the use of appeals. So it would be good to know some of these not so appropriate called fallacies. And I'm pretty sure you are familiar with the so-called fallacies. Because during your previous English subjects, you already encountered these fallacies. And I assume this is not your first time to hear this. So part of this illogical, improper use of appeals or fallacies, we have the so-called deceptive appeals. So we will now discuss as part of evaluating the images and messages, we need also to consider the deceptive appeal. So by the way, what is this deceptive appeal? So deceptive appeal means the technique of conviction or persuasion in which the writer or the author uses incorrect reasoning. So that you can avoid falling into the pitfall of believing this incorrect writing, it would be good to study them. Okay, so how to study? So this time, we will learn about the logical fallacies. So part of this deceptive appeal or the incorrect reasoning is this what we call logical fallacy. So there are different fallacies that we need to be familiar with, and I will discuss it, and we will discuss it here in this video one by one. So the first video, the first topic, the first lesson would be the fallacies. But before jumping into the different fallacies, we need first to consider the definition of what is this logical fallacies. So as being mentioned, it is the flawed reasoning or flawed thinking. They can be obvious or subtle. So it takes practice to detect them. So there are instances that the information or the incorrect reasoning is obvious, that you would say, oh, that is not correct. You are wrong. And there are also information that is subtle. It means you cannot recognize that the information is correct or not. So that's the reason why this video trying to explain to you what are these fallacies for you to be able to correctly evaluate a certain information, identifying or ensuring the validity, the appropriateness, the reliability, and the accuracy of the information. So the first fallacy that we are going to talk about is the sweeping generalization. So if we say sweeping generalization, it has something to do with putting all members of a group into category. Again, putting all members of a group into category. So the definition, let's have an example of it. So the definition in one dictionary of the word Filipina, which was defined as a maid. And this statement was a big issue a couple of years ago, that one particular country state in their dictionary that the definition of Filipina is a maid. Therefore, this is an invalid definition. Invalid definitions stem from the observation that some Filipinas are employed as maids. So their explanation was because Filipinas or some of the Filipinas went to abroad, their work there are maids. So since a number of Filipinas were seen as maids, the sweeping or the incorrect generalization is that all Filipinas therefore are maids, which is wrong. So the logical form of it, X is a common and accepted rule. Therefore, there are no exceptions to X. That is the logical form of sweeping generalization. Another example, Mindanao is tagged as a war zone area. Take note, the subject in the sentence is the Mindanao. So that is the general. It was being mentioned that Mindanao is a war zone area. Therefore, there is categorization. All members of a group into category. So if somebody would say, I am a thief, all the family members of mine are thieves. So that is sweeping generalization. Okay? So you need to remember, one is too many. That is sweeping generalization. Sweeping generalization. You have to remember that. So after sweeping generalization, we have incorrect sampling. Incorrect sampling. So if we say incorrect sampling, it is the sample was taken only from one sector of society. So when some people concluded that many Filipinos want an amendment of the Constitution based on the opinion of mayors and barangay captains, basically, there is an obvious flaw in this conclusion, since the sample was taken only from one sector of the society. This one, an ordinance was being implemented based on the opinion of the mayor, councilors, and barangay captains. Take note, there are only few mentioned in the example. Take note, the sample was taken only from one sector of the society. And if we will go back to the example given, ordinance was being implemented just based on the mayor, councilor, barangay captains. So there are only 3 sectors that was being considered in the implementation of an ordinance. That is an incorrect sampling. Okay? So the logical form is sample S is taken from population P. And you have to take note, sample S is a very small part of population P. Now the conclusion C is drawn from sample S and applied to population P, which is wrong. Okay? Another example. There is an ordinance implemented in your barangay. And the implementation was taken from your barangay captain and councilors only, without considering the purok leaders and all other officials. And that's the population P, barangay as a whole. But the ordinance was being implemented due to the small population, which is the barangay captain and the councilor only, which is part only of all the barangay. Therefore, there is incorrect sampling. If that would be the case, the ordinance should not be implemented if it is based only on small part. Okay? Another concrete example, in conducting a meeting, it is considered that the meeting should not be conducted if the population will not, hindi siya aabot ng half. Okay, like for example, the members of the meeting are 50 people. It should be half of it or portion. Like kung halimbawa, sa 50 na mga members, 5 lang ang wala, pwede. Pero kung sasabihin natin 10 lang ang meron tapos may meeting, hindi pwede yon. Incorrect sampling yon. Okay? So that's incorrect sampling. There is misconception of samples. You have to remember that. And the next one is number 3, that is the argumentum ad hominem. In argumentum ad hominem, you have to remember the word character of a person. Okay, this is very understandable. If you hear a statement that assails to the character of a person, that is argumentum ad hominem. Okay, so example of it, poor should not be trusted because they are thieves. The thieves there is the characteristic of a poor, which you are trying to assails the characteristic of a person without considering the belief that you are standing for. Just because the poor are thief, you will not trust them? Okay, that's the argumentum ad hominem. So if you are looking for argumentum ad hominem, you have to make it sure that there should be character of a person. Okay, if there is character of a person, that is argumentum ad hominem. Next, argumentum ad baculum. Argumentum ad baculum, this is the one rule. Okay, it literally means argument using a stick. One uses force to instead of reason to win our argument. So that means there is one rule. Very common example. A parent would threaten to spank a child instead of explaining a wrongdoing. This is this is very concrete example to us. We already encountered this. That instead of um, explaining our flaws, we somehow experience the threatening spank, the threatening stick. So instead of hearing those explanations, we're able to cry and experience the saddest part of being a child. Okay, that is Argumentum ad baculum. So always remember, ad baculum, there is one rule. So regardless it's positive or negative, as long as there is one rule. Okay, that is ad baculum. Next, begging the question. Begging the question means any form of argument where the conclusion is assumed in one of the premises. Okay, so the example of it, paranormal activity is real because I have experienced what can only be described as paranormal activity. Okay, so this statement assumes that one argument has been proven, but it actually was not. Okay, so this is an example of begging the question. So the opinion that we cannot question the decision of the judge who was given the constitutional power to try and decide commits this erroneous reasoning. Okay, begging the question. So this is you are trying to believe or assume an argument that has been proven, but actually there is no proof at all. That is the thing that you need to remember. So that is begging the question. Next is either or fallacy. It is called false dilemma. When a writer or speaker sees a complicated issue from the point of view of only two choices, but forgetting other possibilities, you have to remember this. You are only pointing two choices without considering other possibilities. Let's have an example for you to be able to understand. All government officials are either corrupt or immoral. And come to think of it, corrupt and immoral are two negative points. So what's the point of the choices considering the two choices that you have are both negative? So that's what either or fallacy trying to imply. You are mentioning two negative points without considering other possibilities. And take note, you are mentioning all government officials. So in the tone of this statement is precisely you are trying to say this is correct, that all government officials are corrupt and official. So you have to choose. The government you have is corrupt or the government you have is immoral. There's no other options at all. Okay? So that is either or fallacy. There are two categories or there are two choices, but forgetting other possibilities. There are choices, but both of those choices are either way choice because those are negative without considering another or other possibilities. So complicated issue from the point of view that is false dilemma or either or fallacy. So let's go back for you to be able to remember it. So if we say sweeping generalization, that means putting all members of a group into category. So for example, I am an immoral. All the members of the family are immoral. That is sweeping generalization. Next, incorrect sampling. An ordinance was being implemented based on the mayor and the councilor. That is incorrect sampling because an ordinance should be fully implemented based on the number of people. Okay? So next, argumentum ad hominem, character of a person. So you need to remember that. Next, ad baculum, one force or one rule. Kung ano yung gusto kong sabihin, yun yun. Kung anong gusto kong gawin, yun yung gagawin ko. Walang iba. That's ad baculum. And the fifth one is begging the question. So any form of argument where the conclusion assumed one of the premises. You're trying to ask the question considering it's already understandable. Okay? So next, either or fallacy, you are trying to trap into two choices that both are not choice. So this is a false dilemma because you are not trying to check other possibilities. So like example of it is all government officials are either corrupt or immoral without considering that not all government officials are corrupt and immoral. So that is either or fallacy or false dilemma. So next, we will talk about false analogy. So in false analogy, you are trying to compare two things that don't share a fundamental similarity. So from the word itself, analogy, you're trying to analyze something that has no connections at all. Example, not believing in the literal resurrection of Jesus because the Bible has errors and contradictions. It's like denying that the Titanic sank because eyewitnesses did not agree if the ship broke in half before or after it sank. Okay? So you are not, there is false comparison between the two things. The first one is about Jesus and the second one is about Titanic sank. There is no connections at all. And another example, a teacher told a student who requested for a removal test because she failed the examination. So there's one student who failed the examination. And the teacher told the student to request for a removal exam or removal test. So the teacher will let the student take the removal test if the student undergoes an X-ray, which is also a test. So then the re-examination would not change the result at all. In short, there is false analogy. Therefore, a false analogy is committed in reasoning because the analogy between classroom test and X-ray test is not basically clear at all. There is no connection. So that's what we call false analogy. So you have to remember that if we say false analogy, there is comparison of two things that are not related with each other. That is false analogy. Next, false cause. False cause, this false reasoning rises from an error in the cause and effect relationship. Okay, example of it. Every time I go to sleep, the sun goes down. Basically, there is false cause. When the sun goes down when I go to sleep. So, example, if I go to sleep 9 in the morning, the sun will goes down because I am sleeping. That is a false cause. Okay? Mali po yung dahilan. Okay, yun yung titingnan mo sa statement. May dahilan siya, mali yung dahilan niya. Okay? Next. Oversimplification. From the word itself, oversimplified. When a contributing factor is assumed to be the cause, or when a complex array of causal factors is reduced to a single cause. Okay, let's try to look for the example. Corruption among police can be stopped by increasing their salary. So this is a mislead of claim because corruption is caused by many other factors, not only the low salary. Because this example trying to imply that if these police people experience the increase of their salary, then therefore there is no corrupt at all. And that is a misinterpretation. That is simplification. Because you are just trying to check one aspect. It is not it is an oversimplification to look at the problem of the corruption, which is definitely complex. There are a lot of factors of corruption. There are a lot of things that you need to consider if we say corruption. But on the statement itself, you are just trying to oversimplify one aspect of it, which is the increasing their salary, which is definitely one angle, the salary itself. So that is oversimplification. You have to remember from the word itself, oversimplified or oversimplification, you are trying to exaggerate something, exaggerate the problem. You're trying to put some solution in it, exaggerated solution, considering that is not really the solution of the problem. Yun yung pagatandaan ninyo. Oversimplification, yung tinatry mong solusyonan ng isang problema, pero yung solution ng problema mo is sobrang exaggerated, na oversimplified na siya, na hindi, parang feeling na hindi naman siya talaga kailangan. Okay? Yun yung ibig sabihin ng oversimplification. Okay? Kaya pa. Next is the non-sequitur. Okay? The non-sequitur means when the conclusion does not reasonably follow from the arguments. So there is a conclusion. So there is, the example of it is people generally like to walk on the beach. Beaches have sand. Therefore, having sand floors in homes would be a great idea. So this is not sequitur. Why? The conclusion, this reasoning, this erroneous reasoning is committed when the conclusion does not reasonably follow from the argument. The argument there is people generally like to walk on the beach. Okay? And the conclusion, therefore, having sand floors in homes would be a great idea because people generally like to walk on the beach, and because of their, in the beaches or in beaches, they have sand. So if you will just put sand floors in your homes, therefore people living in that home will generally like to walk. There is a misconclusion. Okay, there is a wrong conclusion in part of this. So if we say argument, that is a statement, okay, the main statement of the problem. So the argument there is people generally like to walk on the beach. That's the main statement of it. And why is it there is a wrong conclusion? How to identify that there is wrong conclusion? Because of the word therefore. Therefore is a transitional device that means conclude, to conclude something. So having sand floors in homes would be a great idea, haven't something to do with walking on the beach. Okay? So next, post ergo propter hook. Post ergo propter hook, when a conclusion is drawn from a cause and effect relationship that is purely coincidental. Okay, very common. This post ergo propter hook, this is very common to those people who are superstitious. Example of it, let's have an example. One says he had a bad morning because a black cat crossed his way. Another one, Friday the 13th. My wallet was lost last Friday. I remember that was 13th. So there is mismatch of, or there is erroneous in reasoning in terms of the result. When a conclusion is drawn from a cause and effect relationship, that is a coincidence. Therefore, there is no evidence at all. Just because you experienced seeing a black cat cross your way, then you will connect this experience to your bad morning. That is post ergo propter hoc. So you have to remember, post ergo propter hoc, these are superstitious beliefs. So you accompanied your beliefs towards the situation that you are experiencing with. So next is fallacy of reduction. So this is actually like, there are 18, okay? Maybe um, 18 and there's an additional 5. So it's like more 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So there are 23 deceptive appeals, or what we call the logical fallacies. So let's have number 12, fallacy of reduction. It is similar to post ergo propter hoc because it identifies one reason for a problem but does not consider other possible causes. Example, he became successful because of good luck. So it is like a post, no, it is like post ergo propter hoc, similar to post ergo propter hoc. In post ergo propter hoc, superstitious belief. In fallacy of reduction, you are trying to identify one reason only. Okay? There is still belief, but you are trying to identify that one belief only without considering other possible causes. Just because of good luck, you were able to become successful, or you will become successful. Basically, that's a big question. So that's what we call fallacy of reduction. From the word itself, reduction. You are trying to reduce some aspect without considering it. So it's like post ergo propter hoc because you're trying to believe something. In post ergo propter hoc, you try to believe on your superstitious thing. While on fallacy of reduction, you're trying to believe something, the main reason why it was happened to you without considering another factor or possibilities or cause. That's fallacy of reduction.